In our previous video about how to break a monopoly, we talked about Schumpeter and how he believed that monopolies in a capitalist economy will create the conditions for competitors to emerge, thereby reducing their own power and dominance until the market became competitive once again. We talked about Netflix and how it had helped revolutionize the pseudo-monopolistic practice of movie studios, theaters, and video rental platforms, bringing forth a qualitative change to the entertainment industry. We did so under the lenses of Schumpeterian theory of competition and the creative destruction that innovation would unleash. Go check that video if you have not done so. But every side has a counter-argument, and so does every theory. You might have noticed that we live in a time where large companies only keep getting bigger, as competitors fall at their feet and get acquired or bankrupt. Looking at our current industry landscape and titans like Amazon, Google, or Disney, it might seem like Schumpeter was wrong, that his creative destruction was a sort of idealized version of capitalism that simply did not translate to real life. Be it through the mechanisms by which Amazon replicates successful third-party sellers in its marketplace, calling them Amazon Basics, or how Disney strong-arms theaters into reserving IMAX and other premium screens for the next MCU movie, it would seem that pseudo-monopolistic entities simply won't take the gales of creative destruction laying down. Is there room for radical ideas in our current market? In reality, can entrepreneurial Davids really take down established Goliaths? Can one compete against those that run the game? Today, we will study the practical limitations of innovators to break down monopolies. This video serves as a counter-argument to our previous one, How to Break Down a Monopoly. And it uses a framework, a revisionist take on Schumpeterian creative destruction, generated by two economists, Adams and Brock, in 1995. Schumpeterian innovations were meant to be the natural weapon of capitalist systems against the inefficiencies and overall socially undesirable outcomes of monopolistic behavior. However, later authors that approached Schumpeter's idea on innovation and creative destruction conducted a harsh and revisionist analysis, which outlined some of their limitations as well as other points that Schumpeter may have not considered. These authors that follow Schumpeter considered his theories too ideal, in the sense that, much like any other economic idea at the time, would only occur in a perfect capitalist world. Many also argued that Schumpeter's framework did not account for the power differential between the disruptor and the established would-be monopolist. This power differential, they believed, extended far beyond the price-setting ability of monopolists, but also covered certain areas that Schumpeter did not pay much attention to, like political power, with industry leaders being able to effect legislation to protect them, or sheep deep pockets, who would allow them to take on losses, outpricing the innovator for long enough to kick it out of the market. These economists considered in their critique to the relative real-life implications of Schumpeterian innovations a series of limitations regarding the effects of creative destruction. They indicated that existing asymmetries of both power and financial liquidity allowed monopolies to erect storm shelters to shield themselves from the gales of creative destruction. Monopolies would therefore be in a position to seize control of the innovation that threatens to weaken or destroy their position before the creative destruction has taken place, integrating the innovation that would have destroyed them as an asset to further consolidate their power. The asymmetry of power that later economists were referring to would be derived from the established position of the monopoly as a figure of influence within the industry, which would enable it to exert a continuous and large amount of pressure onto the entrepreneur. This would take on the form of threats of lobbying, or perhaps a hostile takeover in which pressure to sell is put on shareholders individually instead of the entity as a whole. One of the most notorious recent examples of a pseudo-hostile takeover of an innovator by a monopolistic entity can be found in Microsoft's 2015 acquisition of the video game developer Mojang. Mojang was the independent developer of one of the largest video game sensations of the last decade, Minecraft. With 33 million copies sold and 10,000 new players per day at its peak in 2013, it classifies as a potential generator of creative destruction in an industry dominated by either large players like Sony and Nintendo or third-party developers aligned with them. The threat and opportunity it would imply drew the attention of 3 of the biggest PC video game developers at the time: Activision Blizzard, Electronic Arts, and Microsoft. And even though reports differ as to how the final decision to sell Mojang to Microsoft was reached, most agree that the 3 large game developers targeted their requests and bids as well as their pressure movements directly to Minecraft's developer and majority stakeholder of Mojang, Markus Persson. This could be considered an example of a hostile takeover, which in simple terms is an effort on the part of the acquirer, in this case Microsoft, to direct their bids directly to individual stakeholders instead of the traditional route of presenting the purchasing decision to the entire board and management. This practice is frowned upon for its ability to psychologically affect the decision makers on an individual level and sidestep the democratic decision of the board. Apparently, Microsoft exerted pressure on Persson, resulting in an apparent breakdown in which he conceded agreeing to Microsoft's terms. A Mojang's newsletter of 2014 simply states, "The pressure of owning a company of so much global significance became too much for him to handle." This is an example of the kind of powers an established player has over distributors, its sheer size and deep pockets, as well as ability to sidestep the standard process of decision-making allows them to remain in control of their industry. The second asymmetry between innovators and monopolies has to do with credit dependence. Established players enjoy a much wealthier and more liquid financial state relative to that of the up-and-coming entrepreneurs, and this allows them to deposit hefty sums as bids for the innovation which, were the entrepreneur in a credit-dependent position, can generally be expected to accept. This point of the credit-dependent entrepreneur acting as a drawback to an innovation's creative destruction is of particular significance, since as we indicated previously, Schumpeter designed his entire economic system so growth came from within the system, and not merely as an adaptation to exogenous change. One example of a wealthier monopoly purchasing a less liquid credit-dependent company can be seen in Disney's 2009 purchase of Marvel Studios. All throughout the 90s, the comic book company Marvel had been struggling, primarily due to the sustained decline in the comic book sales, only being able to operate thanks to the credit they had been able to obtain. Coincidentally, much of its debt, $1.7 million, was owed to Disney. By 1996, they filed for bankruptcy, which enabled them, thanks to an investment group and selling the movie rights to its most popular superhero characters, to survive. By 2008, Marvel was still in a financially difficult situation, but it came up with a somewhat innovative product in the entertainment industry. They would develop superhero movies set in a shared, interconnected universe. To finance their first movie, Iron Man, they used the rights to the rest of their characters as collateral. As a financial analyst at the time put it, if Marvel Studios' plans had failed, the bank would own them and the Marvel Cinematic Universe would be dead. But they didn't fail, and when Iron Man made $585 billion, the Walt Disney Company saw the potential of a superhero-based cinematic universe, the first of its kind in the 21st century. In 2009, Disney bought Marvel Studios and the rights to all its characters and future movies for $4.3 billion. Undoubtedly, such a price paid to a company in Marvel's financial situation reflects the concerns with monopolistic asymmetries of credit independence that Schumpeter's critics were referring to, especially when contemplating testimonies such as that of Avi Arad, one of the main producers of the MCU movies, at the time of the purchase. "It's a cheap price, it's nothing. It's a very strong brand, and we planned on this brand." Nevertheless, when we are analyzing numbers of such magnitude, perhaps the absolute value is of less relevance than the time it took for Disney to pay off such an investment. Tom DeSanto, a Hollywood producer and analyst, argued that in 2012, 3 years after the acquisition, it had already made up the money. They were able to almost get the company for free. The one thing that Disney was lacking was a big footprint in boys' merchandising. They had girls with the Disney princesses, so this gave them the other half. Add to that the Avengers box office and DVD and licensing and merchandising, and they were in profit mode already. This means that by that estimation, Disney, an established player, was able to not only eliminate a potential future competitor from the market, not only do so for a cheap price, but also transform their assets into the most lucrative multimedia empire in Hollywood. As of 2022, after the release of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, the MCU has made over $26 billion in revenues from the movies and theaters alone, not counting video-on-demand sales or merchandising. This means that, like Avi Arad, the Disney executive said, it was, in fact, nothing that they paid for Marvel. Now, does this all mean that Schumpeter was wrong? Is this an indicator of the sheer power of established players to achieve and remain in pseudo-monopolistic positions? Is there absolutely nothing that can be done against the defenders of the status quo? I don't think so. Every once in a while, a disruptor does come and revolutionize the core of an industry, sometimes taking a couple of established titans down. But it does put into context the sheer power and business know-how required to do so successfully. Perhaps Schumpeter's worst mistake was assuming that monopolistic entities will simply take the revolution of their industries laying down. This is not the case in reality. The powers they have gained as leaders of their industries will be used, everything to guarantee survival. Some of these tools at their reach might be relatively standard processes of capitalist systems, like mergers or acquisitions. Others are an outgrowth of a less than perfect competition in an industry, such as the ability of large established players to lobby governments or put selling pressure on individuals until they break. In his defense, Schumpeter did consider some of the asymmetries in power and capital that we have explored today, and he believed that it was the government's duty to make sure some of these practices remained outside of the common behavior in a competitive market. We have many more videos online already, so why not check them out? How about why you should only work 4 days a week, or how the Switch saved Nintendo? This is all from me for today. If you enjoyed the video, please like it and subscribe to Rebel Economics, and I'll see you all in the next one.